American Royals. First Chapter Friday read aloud video with the word nerd Amanda Zieba and author interview with Katharine McGee. Today as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Make sure you stay till the end to see if you've written it down correctly. Hi, I'm Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week I'm going to be reading to you from American Royals by Katharine McGee, and you guys, I know I say this all the time, but I stinking loved this book. I loved it for so many reasons. One, it's like this alternative twist history that plays out in modern society, and the social studies nerd in me just geeks out at all the cool little drop-ins that the author puts in there that connect to history, but again are modern day. There's two love triangles in this book. There are sibling rivalry, there's political intrigue, there's fancy dresses. There's so much goodness in this book. It's the first in a series of 4, which is also amazing. The 4th one actually just came out, so you can binge the whole thing right away if you want. You don't even have to wait. And perhaps the most exciting thing for me today, probably going to fangirl a little bit, but we're going to get a chance to talk to Katharine McGee after I read you the first chapter. Before I can read you the first chapter, I have to read you the blurb so you know what it's about, and then we'll get a chance to talk to Katharine. So, what is this thing that I'm raving about? Okay, what if America had a royal family? The Washingtons, that's right, the descendants of George, have been on the American throne for 2.5 years. They're the most famous family in the world, but behind the glittering ballrooms and the perfect public personas are romances and scandalous secrets that could cost them the throne. Let's meet the players in the game. First up, the heir, Princess Beatrice. She knows duty to the crown comes before all else, right? Next up, the spare, Princess Samantha. She's pretty sure her only duty is to party hard. Next up, the schemer, Daphne Dayton, and she would do anything to get her hands on a crown. Anything. And then there's the commoner, Nina Gonzalez. She's just a girl in love with a prince, and she's about to steal the spotlight. The power, the drama, the intrigue, the crown. This is the story of the American Royals. We're going to start with the prologue. You already know the story of the American Revolution and the birth of the American monarchy. You might know it from the picture books you read as a child, from your elementary school performances when you longed to play the role of King George I or Queen Martha and instead were cast as the cherry tree. You know it from songs and movies and history textbooks, from that summer you visited the Capitol and went on the official Washington Palace tour. You've heard the story so many times that you could tell it yourself, how after the Battle of Yorktown, Colonel Louis Nicola fell to his knees before General George Washington and begged him on behalf of the entire nation to become America's first king. Of course, the general said yes. Historians love to debate whether, in another world, things might have gone differently. What if George Washington had refused to be king and asked instead to be an elected representative? A prime minister, perhaps he would have made up an entirely new name for the office, like president. Maybe, inspired by America's example, other nations, France and Russia and Prussia, Austria, Hungary, and China and Greece would eventually abolish their own monarchies, giving rise to a new democratic age. But we all know that never happened. And you didn't come here for a made-up story. You came here for the story of what happens next. You came here to hear what America looks like 250 years later when the descendants of George I are still on the throne. It's a story of soaring ballrooms and backstair corridors, of secrets and scandal, of love and heartbreak. It is a story of the most famous family in the world, who plays out their family dramas on the greatest stage of all. This is the story of the American Royals. Chapter 1 is told from Beatrice's perspective. We go through many different points of view, many of the characters that I mentioned on the back. And this one's told from Beatrice. She is the heir. She will be the queen next. And this is being told during present day. Beatrice could trace her ancestry back to the 10th century. It was really only through Queen Martha's side, though most people refrain from mentioning that. After all, King George I had been nothing but an upstart planter from Virginia until he married well and then fought even better. He fought so well that he helped win America's independence and was rewarded by the people with a crown. But through Martha, at least, Beatrice could trace her lineage for more than 40 generations. Among her forebears were kings and queens and archdukes, scholars and soldiers, and even a canonized saint. We have much to learn by looking back, her father always reminded her. Never forget where you came from. It was hard to forget your ancestors when you carried their names with you, as Beatrice did. Beatrice Georgina Frederica Louise of the House of Washington, Princess Royal of America. Beatrice's father, His Majesty King George IV, shot her a glance. She reflectively sat up straighter to listen as the High Constable reviewed the plans of tomorrow's Queen's Ball. Her hands were clasped over her demure pencil skirt, her legs crossed at the ankle because as her etiquette teacher had drilled into her by hitting her wrist with a ruler each time she slipped up, a lady never crossed her legs at the thigh. And the rules were especially stringent for Beatrice because she was not only a princess, she was also the first woman who would ever inherit the American throne. The first woman who would be queen in her own right, not a queen consort married to a king, but a true queen regent. If she'd been born 20 years earlier, the succession would have jumped over her and skipped to Jeff. But her grandfather had famously abolished that centuries-old law, dictating that all subsequent generations, the throne would pass to the oldest child, not to the oldest boy. Beatrice let her gaze drift over the conference table before her. It was littered with papers and scattered cups of coffee that had long since gone cold. Today was the last cabinet session until January, which meant it had been filled with year-end reports and long spreadsheets of analysis. The cabinet meetings always took place here in the Star Chamber, named for the gilded stars painted on its blue walls, and the famous star-shaped oculus overhead. Winter sunlight poured through it to dapple invitingly over the table, not that Beatrice would get to enjoy it. She rarely had time to go outside, except on the days she rose before dawn to join her father on his run through the Capitol, flanked by security officers. For a brief and uncharacteristic moment, she wondered what her siblings were doing right now, if they were back yet from their whirlwind trip through East Asia. Samantha and Jeff, twins and 3 years younger than Beatrice, were a dangerous pair. They were lively and spontaneous, full of bad ideas, and unlike most teenagers, they had the power to actually carry out those ideas, much to their parents' regret. Now, 6 months after they'd finished high school, it was clear that neither of them knew what to do with themselves, except celebrate the fact that they were 18 and could legally drink. No one ever expected anything of the twins. All the expectation in the family and really in the world was focused like a white-hot spotlight on Beatrice. At last the High Constable finished his report. The king gave a gracious nod and stood. "Thank you, Jacob. If there is no further business, this concludes today's meetings." Everyone rose to their feet and began to shuffle out of the room, chatting about tomorrow's ball or their holiday plans. They seemed to have temporarily set aside their political rivalries. The king kept his cabinet evenly divided between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, though Beatrice felt certain those rivalries would be back in full force come the new year. Her personal security detail, Connor, glanced up from where he stood outside the door next to the king's protection officer. Both men were members of the Revere Guard, the elite corps of officers who devoted their lives to the service of the crown. "Beatrice, could you stay a minute?" her dad asked. Beatrice paused in the doorway. "Of course." The king sat back down and she followed suit. "Thank you again for helping with the nominations," he told her. They both glanced at the paper before him, where a list of names was printed in alphabetical order. Beatrice smiled. "I'm glad you accepted them." Tomorrow was the palace's annual holiday party, the Queen's Ball, so named because at the very first Christmas ball, Queen Martha had urged George I to ennoble dozens of Americans who'd aided the Revolution. The tradition had persisted ever since. Each year at the ball, the king knighted Americans for their service to the country, thereby making them lords or ladies. And for the first time, he had let Beatrice suggest the candidates for knighthood. Before she could ask what he wanted, a tap sounded at the door. The king gave an audible sigh of relief as Beatrice's mom swept into the room. Queen Adelaide came from nobility on both sides of her family. Before her marriage to the king, she'd been set to inherit the Duchy of Canterbury and the Duchy of Savannah. The double duchess, people had called her. Adelaide had grown up in Atlanta and had never lost her ethereal southern charm. Even now her gestures were touched with elegance, the tilt of her head as she smiled at her daughter, the turn of her wrist as she settled into the walnut chair to Beatrice's right. Caramel highlights gleamed in her rich brown hair, which she curled each morning with hot rollers and wore encircled by a headband. The way they were sitting, apparent to either side of Beatrice boxing her in, gave her the distinct sense that she was being ambushed. "Hey, Mom," Beatrice said in a slightly puzzled tone. The Queen wasn't usually part of their political discussions. "Beatrice, your mother and I were hoping to discuss your future," the King began. The Princess blinked, disconcerted. She was always thinking about her future. "On a more personal level," her mother clarified. "We were wondering if there was anyone special in your life right now?" Beatrice startled. She'd expected this talk sooner or later, had done her best to mentally prepare herself for it. She just hadn't assumed it would be quite so soon. "No, there isn't," she assured them. Her parents nodded distractedly. They both knew she wasn't dating anyone. The entire country knew it. The King cleared his throat. Your mother and I were hoping that you might start searching for a partner, for that person you'll spend your life with." His words seemed to echo, amplified around the Star Chamber. Beatrice had almost no romantic experience to speak of, not that the various foreign princes near her age hadn't tried. The only one to make it a second date had been Prince Nicholas of Greece. His parents had urged him to do an exchange program at Harvard one semester, clearly hoping that he and the American princess would fall madly in love. Beatrice went out with him for a while to please their families, but nothing had come of it. Even though as a younger son of a royal family, Nicholas was one of the few men actually eligible to go out with Beatrice. The future monarch could only marry someone of noble or aristocratic blood. Beatrice had always known that she couldn't date the wrong person, couldn't even kiss the wrong person, the way everyone else at college seemed to. After all, no one wanted to see their future monarch walk of shaming home from a college party. No, it was much safer if the heir to the throne had no sexual past for the press to rig through, no baggage from past boyfriends, no exes who might sell intimate secrets to a tell-all memoir. There could be no ups and downs in Beatrice's relationships. Once she publicly dated someone, that was it. They would have to be happy and stable and committed. It'd been enough to steer her clear of dating almost entirely. For years, the press had applauded Beatrice for being careful with her reputation. But ever since she turned 21, she'd noticed a shift in the way they discussed her love life. Instead of dedicated and virtuous, the reporters had begun to call her lonely and pitiable, or even worse, frigid. If she never dated anyone, they complained, how was she supposed to get married and start an all-important business of providing the next heir to the throne? "Don't you think I'm a little young to be worried about this?" Beatrice asked, relieved at how calm she sounded. But then she had long ago been trained to keep her emotions hidden from public display. "I was your age when your father and I got married, and I was pregnant with you the following year," the Queen reminded her. A truly terrifying thought. "That was 20 years ago," Beatrice protested. "No one expects me to. I mean, things are different now. We're not saying you should run to the altar tomorrow. All we're asking is that you start to think about it. This won't be an easy decision, and we want to help." "Help?" "There are several young men whom we'd like for you to meet. We've invited them all to the ball tomorrow night." Queen unclasped her pebble leather handbag and pulled out a folder, color-coded plastic tabs peeking from its edge. She handed it to her daughter. Each tab was labeled with a name. Lord Jose Ramirez, future Duke of Texas. Lord Marshall Davis, future Duke of Orange. Lord Theodore E., future Duke of Boston. "You're trying to set me up? We're just giving you some options, introducing you to young men who might be a good fit." Beatrice flipped numbly through the pages. They were filled with information, family trees, photos, high school transcripts, even the guys' heights and weights. "Did you use your security clearance to get all this?" "What? No." The King looked shocked at the suggestion that he would abuse his privileges with the NSA. The young men and their families all volunteered this information. They know what they're signing on for. "So you've already talked to them," Beatrice said woodenly. "And tomorrow night at the Queen's Ball, you'll want me to interview these potential husbands?" Her mother's brows shot up in protest. "Interview makes it sound so impersonal. All we're asking is that you have a conversation with them, get to know them a little. Who knows? One of them might surprise you." "Maybe it is like an interview," the King admitted. "Beatrice, when you do choose someone, he won't just be your husband. He'll also be America's first king consort. And being married to the reigning monarch is a full-time job." "A job that never stops," the Queen chimed in. Through the window, down the marble courtyard, Beatrice heard a burst of laughter and gossip, and a single voice struggling valiantly to rise above the din. Probably a high school tour going past on the last day before holiday break. These teenagers weren't that much younger than she was, yet Beatrice felt irrevocably distant from them. She used her thumb to pull back the pages of the folder and let them fan back down. Only a dozen young men were included. "This folder is pretty thin," she said softly. Of course, Beatrice had always known that she would be fishing from a tiny pond, that her romantic options were incredibly narrow. It wasn't as bad as it had been 100 years ago, when the marriage of the king was the matter of public policy rather than a matter of the heart. At least she wouldn't have to get married to seal a political treaty. But it still seemed a lot to hope that she might fall in love with someone on this very short list. "Your father and I were very thorough. We combed through all the sons and grandsons of the nobility before we compiled these names," her mother said gently. The king nodded. "There are some good options here, Beatrice. Even if everyone in this folder is smart and thoughtful and from a good family, these are the type of men who will support you without letting their egos get in the way." From a good family. Beatrice knew precisely what that meant. They were the sons and grandsons of high-ranking American noblemen, if only because the foreign princes around her age, Nicholas or Charles of Schleswig-Holstein or the Grand Duke Peter, had all already struck out. Beatrice glanced back and forth between her parents. What if my future husband isn't on this list? What if I don't want to marry any of them? "You haven't even met them yet," her father cut in. "Besides, your mother and I were set up by our parents, and look how that turned out." He met the Queen's eyes with a fond smile. Beatrice nodded, a bit reassured. She knew that her dad had picked her mom just like this, from a short list of pre-approved options. They had met only a dozen times before their wedding day, and their arranged marriage had ended up blossoming into a genuine love match. She tried to consider the possibility that her parents were right, that she could fall in love with one of the young men listed in this terrifyingly slim folder. It didn't seem likely. She had yet to meet these noblemen, but she could already guess that what they were like. The same type of spoiled, self-absorbed young men who'd been circling her for years. The type of guys she'd been carefully turning down at Hartford each time they asked her to a final club party or fraternity date night. And type of guys who looked at her and saw not a person, but a crown. Sometimes Beatrice thought traitorously that was how her parents saw her, too. The king braced his palms on the conference table. Against the tan skin of his hands glinted a pair of rings, the simple gold of his wedding band, and next to it the heavy signet ring marked with the Great Seal of America. His 2 marriages, to the Queen and to his country. "Our hope for you has always been that you might find someone you love, who can also handle the requirements that come with this life," he told her. "Someone who is the right fit for you and America." Beatrice heard the unspoken subtext, that if she couldn't find someone who checked both boxes, then America needed to come first. It was more important that she marry someone who could do this job and do it well than she follow her heart. And truthfully, Beatrice had given up on her heart a long time ago. Her life didn't belong to her. Her choices were never fully her own, and she had known this since she was a child. Her grandfather, King Edward III, had said as much to her on his deathbed. The memory would be forever etched in her mind, the sterile smell of the hospital, the yellow fluorescent lighting, the peremptory way her grandfather had dismissed everyone else from the room. "I need to say a few things to Beatrice," he declared in that frightening growl he used just for her. The dying king had taken Beatrice's small hands in his frail ones. "Long ago, monarchies existed so that the people could serve the monarch. Now the monarch must serve the people. Remember that it is an honor and it is a privilege to be a Washington, and devote your life to this nation." Beatrice gave a solemn nod. She knew it was her duty to put the people first. Everyone had been telling her that since she was born. The words "in service to God and country" had literally been painted on the walls of her nursery. From this point onward, you are 2 people at once. Beatrice the girl, and Beatrice heir to the crown. When they want different things, her grandfather said gravely, the crown must win. Always. Swear it to me. His fingers closed around hers with surprising amount of strength. "I swear," Beatrice had whispered. She didn't remember consciously choosing to say those words. It was as if some greater force, perhaps the spirit of America itself, had taken temporary hold of her and snatched them from her chest. Beatrice lived by that sacred oath. She had always known that this decision was looming in her future, but the suddenness of it all, the fact that her parents expected her to start picking a husband tomorrow, and from such an abbreviated list, made her breath catch. You know that this life isn't an easy one, the king said gently, that it often looks so different from the outside than it really is on the inside. Beatrice, it's crucial that you find the right partner to share it with, someone to help you through the challenges and share in the successes. Your mother and I are a team. I couldn't have done any of it without her. Beatrice swallowed against the tightness in her throat. Well, if she needed to get married for the country's sake, she might as well try to pick one of her parents' choices. Should we look at the candidates before I meet them tomorrow? She said at last, and opened the folder to the first page. Oh, you guys, if you want to know what happens, like this is just the beginning. And I know you're going to love it if you give it a chance. But now, before we read any more, let's go talk to the author, Katharine McGee. All right, readers, here we are in for a super great treat today. We're here with author Katharine McGee, author of American Royals. Katharine, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, me too. I'm very excited. I told them in the intro that I was probably going to fangirl a little bit right now, so I'm excited. First question is, can you tell us where you got the idea for this alternate history story?
Yes. So I've actually been working on the concept for American Royals for a long time, since 2011, when Prince William married Kate Middleton. I was working in New York in book publishing at the time, and I knew that I wanted to write, and I've always been a reader of historical fiction. So I originally thought that I was going to toy around with some kind of idea involving the Tudor court or Queen Victoria. And then I was in New York when this royal wedding happened and sort of watched the city get swept up in the excitement of a wedding of a prince that's not even our prince.
Right.
And so it got me thinking, like, how would we treat royals if we had them? Which led me to the initial concept for American Royals. And I will say the very first iteration of American Royals was very different from the way it turned out. I made the classic mistake of sort of trying to write what I thought the market wanted. And that was right when House of Cards had just come out on Netflix and political thrillers were really in. And I don't even read or watch that many political thrillers, but I tried to write it as a political thriller with an assassination in the opening chapter and this sort of plot to kill off royals and someone trying to solve, like, to save the royals before the next one was killed. And it was not in my wheelhouse at all. And so I had to table it and then come back to it later, realizing that I loved the initial concept, but what I needed to focus on was the coming of age stories and the relationships among the characters.
Yeah, that's such good advice, because so often we're like, "Ooh, this is the next big thing," or "This is the current big thing," and we want to like glom onto that, but we need to do our own things. My
Yes.
next question is, this is a fictional book. It's made up, but did you have to do any research? And I feel like the answer is yes, but I'd love to know more about it.
Yes. So I in some ways I've been researching my entire life because, as I said, I've read so many historical fiction novels, but I was not as familiar with the modern incarnation of the British royal family. So I was certainly aware of them as a general consumer of pop culture is aware of them, but I hadn't gone into great detail of research about, the modern generation of royals. And so reading about them has been a lot of fun. And then also I actually did a lot of reading about the White House and the American presidency, because I really did try. There are some great books on first ladies, and there's a book called The Residence that details just the inner workings of the White House as, I mean, effectively as America's palace, right? As the home head of state. Yes. And so all of that is where I tried to pull details to make it more American, because obviously I didn't just want it to be a clone of the British royal family. I wanted it to have a distinctly American twist. And so those details helped out quite a bit.
Awesome. My next question is, did you always know this was going to be a series? And if you did, or if you had hopes for it, do you plan one book at a time, or do you think about the whole thing as a whole picture?
I always wanted it to be a series. And the funny thing about writing these books or writing any books is that so much of it is subject to the book deal that you make. And so there are many series that I could point out to you. The one that comes to mind right now is Throne of Glass, which was originally just one book. And then I think the publisher bought two more and then three or four more. And if you read the books knowing this, you can see every time that the series sort of wrapped up, but left things open in case there were more books down the line. And so that's obviously what happened to me. I was very lucky that the publisher bought two books. And so I knew going into the first American Royals that there would be a sequel. So I was able to end book one on the cliffhanger that I wanted to, which was a very fun cliffhanger. And then early in book two, I was grappling with the question of, do I just wrap things up in book two or do I keep going? And I really was having so much fun with the world and the characters that I would have loved to continue, but I didn't have go ahead from the publisher. So I tried to walk this very tricky tightrope of, I decided not to give my characters the end game that I knew I wanted them all to have for the end of the story altogether. And I gave them an ending that if book two was the final book, I could live with it, but it was not my dream ending. And there were plenty of readers but it was a confusing ending because it was mostly wrapped up, but a little bit open at the end. And then luckily, right after book two came out, within a matter of weeks, the publisher renewed the series for books 3 and 4. And so I was able to get back into the story. And then again, in the third book, do the big cliffhanger and then tie everything up very neatly in the fourth book. So there are plenty of people who read the second and were very confused by it because they couldn't tell if it was a finale or not. And I think that I don't love writing books like that. I would much rather have them either clearly be the end or clearly be a cliffhanger and there's more coming. It's really hard to almost finish, but not quite. So I don't want to do it again, is what I'm saying. I don't want another series that like halfway stops and then starts again.
Well, I know this one's been super successful, so hopefully the publisher will just be like, yes, Katie, do like all the books. Like just we'll buy them all. One of the things that I love about your books is just when I think something cliche is gonna happen where like a character will like perseverate on not telling somebody something forever and ever, or like whatever the cliche thing that I'm afraid is going to happen, you never do it. You always do something different that keeps it new and keeps me like, oh, thank goodness. I'm glad it didn't go this way I thought it was going to go. And I'm curious if that just comes natural to you or if you like really work hard at that. Do you have thoughts? Am I crazy?
I love this question. And I think it's interesting they use the word cliche because I often try to draw the line between cliche and trope. Because I think trope is a good thing. And my editor and I have a saying that you will love, which is it's a trope for a reason. For instance, in the first American Royals book, when I, very shamelessly put Connor and Beatrice in a cabin in the mountains and it's snowing and there's only one bed. I knew that it's bordering on cliche, but she loved it. And she said, it's a trope for a reason. Like it hits us in the place where we want to feel the emotion. But of course, it's a trope for a reason for so long before it starts to feel like it's dull or tired. So I'm lucky I have a great editor and a great agent who, pull me back when the story is feeling predictable. But exactly as you said, I think trying to go into it with a plan that veers away from too much predictability has helped me a lot. So I am a big outliner. It will not surprise you to learn that with 4 characters and juggling their different stories, they're all intertwined. I cannot just go in and freestyle write. I cannot write, just tackle the blank page and see where the story takes me. Certainly within the story beats and within the chapter, I can do that, but I do have to have a plan going into it. So I start with every book, I go by the 4 characters and I say, what growth do I want to see from them in this book? And effectively, I want them to start at point A and end at point B. So I just figure out their beginning and end. And then I get more gritty and figure out what am I seeing from them throughout the story. And then I start to slowly arc that into story beats. So I'm getting more and more granular with, first there are 7 story beats and then there are 12. And then I kind of make a real 30 chapter outline beat by beat. And I color code the characters so I can see oh, I haven't seen a Samantha chapter in 8 chapters. I need to make sure she's woven in there so we don't lose track of her and things like that. So I spend a lot of time on my outline. I outline very, very heavily. But that said, I'm sure you talk to so many authors who do the complete opposite. I know so many authors who they don't know where their story is ending going into it. And that unfortunately has never happened to me in a big way. There are certainly small surprises. There are characters whose endings have shifted or tweaked a good amount, but everyone is directionally where I knew they would be from the beginning.
Well, like I said, you've got so many characters. There's so many moving pieces. It would be probably, if you just pants the whole thing, there'd probably be a lot that gets thrown out or like inefficient about it
There's
because
still a lot that gets thrown out, sadly, but those chapters are always fun to keep for, you never know when you're going to be able to use them again.
yeah. Yeah, I have files on my computer that say like too afraid to delete and like it's text that I pulled out from something. So my last question for you is when I was digging on your bio on your website, it said that you have a couple of different degrees. You have a degree in writing and literature, and then you also have an MBA, which is a master's in business for people who don't know that acronym. This makes total sense to me because like selling books is like very much an author's job these days. But if you could tell us like a little bit about how you decided to take the educational path that you did and why it included a couple of different areas, I would really be interested in that.
Yes. So like many people, I went to business school not exactly knowing where the path would take me. As I told you, I was working in book publishing in New York as an assistant editor. I had been there for almost 4 years and had actually tried to do the initial iteration of American Royals and had given the pages to my then boss, who very understandably was not interested in them and told me, I'm glad to know that you want to write, but this is not clicking for me at all. And we need to find you something to write. And so I knew that I loved the creative side of things, but I also have always felt drawn to the more business and organizational side of things too. So I started to explore, what are other options to keep me in an entertainment or creative sphere, but not be purely editing. Because again, as I said, and I love my editor so much, I owe her a massive debt of gratitude for each book, but I'm very happy to not be editing anymore. I did not belong editing. I always wanted to be doing something that was more strongly creative. So I went to business school, hoping that that would take me somewhere, whether it was in book publishing or in television or in some kind of new media with, apps or video shorts or something where I could find a role that combined business and the creative side of things. But then it was while I was in my first year of school that I sold the concept for what became my first series, The Thousandth Floor, which is a sort of a futuristic multi-character love story. And then I very quickly reached a decision point where I had to choose whether I was committing to writing full time or whether I was trying to have a more traditional office job. I got offered a couple different jobs, one at a mobile gaming company. I interviewed at Apple, I interviewed at Facebook, and all the places you would expect, and ended up just writing full time. And I'm so glad that I did. And as you said, I think there's so much about knowing business that is really, really beneficial to writers. The writer's strike recently is certainly indicative of that. I think that, writers, it is a business and we need to go into what we're doing armed with a good amount of business knowledge just to make sure that we are, as you said, that we're selling our books and keeping our career moving. I've had it help me a lot with marketing and also with just thinking about myself as a brand in a non-personal way. And then just small things like how to do my taxes, how to file as an LLC. I don't know. I think that has all really helped me. And if I had not taken some of those business classes, I would not have known that because, as you said, nobody teaches you that. Even your publisher, they never, their job is to make the book better. Their job is not, to file your taxes for you. So it's been really nice to have a little bit of background in that as you go into this career that is very much like a black box in some ways.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, that makes total sense. Thank you for sharing all that with us. I reached the end of my 5 questions. But before you go, do you want to tell us about anything you're working on now or what's coming out next? And also, if readers have more questions, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yes, you can find me on social media at Katharine McGee, and that's spelled Katharine, the British way. Recently, the fourth and final American Royals book, Reign, came out just a month ago. And also recently, my other big release was my 7-week-old son, who is currently napping in the next room, which is why I kept looking over there. I hear him starting to make noises. So those are my my recent big projects. And then I do actually have a book coming out next fall that we have not shared anything about it, so I can't give too much information yet, except to say that it is really fun. It is the first in a 2-book project, so in a duology, and it is with my same editor and my same publisher. And it is tonally, if you like American Royals, you will like this. Is really all. It's more of the same. It's more tiaras and fun and backstabbing and drama and romance and forbidden love and kissing in ball gowns, but it is historical. So I am finally writing the historical that I have always wanted to write. In some ways, everyone who knows me very well, my husband, my very close friends, all say this is the most Katie book they've ever seen me write, because it's my true passion project. And there were a lot of obstacles to getting this one published, I will say. And I fought for it every step of the way. So I'm really excited about it. It is so fun. I can't wait for everyone to read it. And then beyond that, who knows? It is funny with our job. You have to kind of always be thinking of what's 3 projects down the line. So I have some ideas scribbled in a notepad, but those won't get written for a while.
Well, we'll be excited to read them whenever they get here. I listen to all of your books on Audible, so Reign is the next one on my playlist. So looking forward to that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your great books.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I'm so glad to be here.
You're welcome. And readers, we will see you again next week for another First Chapter Friday video. Happy reading! To continue reading American Royals by Katharine McGee, or to check out the rest of the series, look for them in your school library, purchase it from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the description box. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. This week's mystery quote says, "The only people free from censure are people who've never taken a stand." Thanks so much for visiting my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. Please like this video and subscribe. And as always, be sure to come back for more First Chapter Friday, brain break videos, and teaching tips. You can find more content from me at these places online. See you again next time. Happy reading!